pretty early this morning, and keeping my eyes on the road, but also talking to you. Been playing with this state of supreme benevolence that is the absence of thought. Noticing more and more that when I find myself in peak states of consciousness where I feel this exquisite, infinite sense of peace, my thoughts will just stop. Or maybe it's the stopping of the thoughts that make way for that space of this infinite sea of love that I'm being carried in. And I'll notice that, like, if thoughts start to come, if I don't identify with those thoughts, I can stay in that supreme river of peace. But the second I have an emotional charge on a thought, I start to feel the vibration like shaking, almost like there's an earthquake in heaven. Oops, there's an earthquake in heaven. I emotionally identified with that thought. That thought like had an emotional charge, and it's like an earthquake in that peak state of that supreme river of benevolence. And so thoughts are kind of like sharks or piranha fish that can take you out of that supreme benevolence. I mean, if you have a thought, excuse my shaking phone, if you have a thought and you're neutral, like your I am presence is totally neutral to every thought. It's kind of what the higher self is, neutral to every thought. It doesn't have any kind of an emotional charge. And it's definitely it's like riding a wave. It's like being a surfer in consciousness, to begin to move into that state of neutrality that enables you to maintain a peak state, right? Oh, Neil Diamond's doing the theme song from Jonathan Livingston Seagull called Be. Such a beautiful song. The Flight of Jonathan Livingston Seagull. So beautiful. I may turn it, let me just have us listen for a minute, or I may turn that off. Presence of like this infinite sea of beingness. And I was in it for 2 hours about 7 years ago. 2 hours with not one thought, right? Total bliss. And then I remember the moment when the thoughts started entering in. It was like, oh boy, try not to, don't identify, just watch them. Just watch the thoughts. Can you do it? Can you just watch them? And then I started watching them, and then certain thoughts, really light thoughts came in that I wasn't identifying with, and I stayed in my peak state. And the thoughts went by. And then some of the thoughts that, like, thoughts about my identity. Oh God, thoughts about, like, what's my job? What's my life? Why am I here? And I could feel myself wrapping around those thoughts with sadness or with identification with the separate self. And as soon as enough thoughts snarled me into this memory of my identity as a separate self, lost all the altitude. So the identity of the separate self is a real bummer. You cannot maintain the peak state if you get any kind of a sense of self-importance or like existence even as a separate self. That is somehow not this river of love, right? I guess if you could be in the river of love and a soft little connection to the separate self, but a connection that's so soft that there's no emotional charge at all to that thing called the separate self. Then you can probably maintain both. You can maintain a sense of a boundary of the separate self while still floating in this river of infinite peace. Isn't that interesting? My phone's probably making a lot of noise, crackling and moving around because this road is kind of rough. And so tomorrow is a big day according to Saint Germain and Adamus, and called Heaven's Cross. March 22nd. It's supposed to be this big day. You know, I always wonder, how big is the day going to be? I really don't know. But it is supposed to be a beautiful day for allowing this supportive energy to move us beyond the heaviness of duality, and to enable us to be open to ourselves on higher timelines. Adamus said it's like we're walking on a road through the forest, and that's 3D linear time. But all of a sudden we're going to see a higher path where things are lighter, more joyful. Excuse my phone moving all around. Things are lighter, things are more joyful. And then we're going to see more and more paths where we exist as our different selves on all of these paths. And then somehow a convergence of all of these paths with our now self on planet Earth. I don't know how that's I don't know how we're gonna experience that. But according to him, there's a really deep sense of lightness, things lightening up, ease and grace and joy. So we'll see. I know we always have to wait and see what's really going to happen. So sorry about all that probably movement of my phone a lot there, but I did want to come on and just talk about this benevolent state of in the absence of thought, right? It's only happened to me a few times where I've stayed in there for a couple of hours. But more and more, I mean, this is our home frequency, is to stay in this state of this river of love, this river of joy, this river of equanimity and neutrality, right? Seems to be the cornerstone of our infinite consciousness is neutrality, right? It doesn't identify with anything finite, right? It becomes this vast container of all that is. And that's the peak state, is that vast allowance of all that is without reactivity. It's kind of, it's a big ask. It's mastery, right? This is a state of mastery. And it's not like something that, oh, I don't know, you're lifting weights or you're training for this, but it just happens at a certain point when you've existed in duality long enough. Your identification starts getting freed from duality. And it just sort of happens. And I always liken it to like bread mold. You know, bread has a certain shelf life. And if you go past that shelf life, it starts changing. The nature of that bread starts disintegrating and becoming something different, right? It's kind of like our consciousness. It has a certain shelf life. After it's been in duality for long enough, it begins to lose the nature of duality, right? And be moved back into unity consciousness, which is that infinite allowance, right? It's not that you don't still, have values and discrimination of things that you want to participate in and actively generate in your life, because you still will, but there's an ability to hold all things in this spaciousness of neutrality. So, hi Craig. Good morning. I woke up early this morning, so I'm kind of partially awake. It's funny, I was hanging out in that peak state kind of this morning, and there was a person turning left in front of me, and I was kind of moving slow, so I could have gone around him, but the guy behind me starts going around me, and I realized, oh, I can go around. And so I start to go around, and this guy behind me honks at me, right? And normally I probably would have had some adrenaline rush and felt some irritation at the guy. But in the state I was in, I was just like in this total allowance, just watching, oh, that's interesting. That was an interesting choice. There was a little irritation. Like I had a thought form like, that wasn't really nice. But it really didn't spark much of a reaction at all. Like none of the fish developed teeth and became piranha fish. We could think of thoughts as fish. When they're just swimming by us in the river, they're perfectly benevolent. Excuse me. But the second those thoughts cause us to have another thought that spirals into some kind of, pardon me, some kind of ego-identified separation experience, then the thoughts get teeth and they start eating us alive. And they rip us right out of the peak state into the predatorial sea, right? So I really like that analogy. It's like thoughts are like these beautiful, benevolent fish until we identify with them. We identify with them in a way that causes us to feel some finiteness, some separation, right? Some separate sense of self. And then, bam, those thoughts get these big, nasty teeth, and they start eating us alive. We're out of the peak state. We're now in the dog-eat-dog egoic realm of duality. So it's like, so just to watch, without judgment, oh gosh, I fell from the peak state because that thought did it. And we get better and better at going, oh, that thought just dumped me down. And then we can love ourselves, remind ourselves that we've always been home. The Course in Miracles has that amazing statement, right? Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. I mean, it's all in that statement, right? It's like nothing real can be threatened. Who we are is invincible. Who we are is indestructible. Who we are is the shining wave of perpetual presence that is never touched by anything in the lower form worlds. So if we can truly begin to identify in that place of total expansive, allowing, non-judgmental, inextinguishable, perpetual, oscillating light, then nothing matters, really. Nothing brings us into matter. We don't identify with anything in the lower form worlds, and we can just be that infinite shining light. So I guess we'll see what happens tomorrow with Heaven's Cross. And the 23rd is also supposed to be a big day. So the 22nd and the 23rd are supposed to be big days. maybe this is the preparation, right? Because last night I was being shown how to stay in the infinite. Here's how you stay in the infinite. Here's how you stay above identifying in anything that's going to pull you out of the infinite Christ. So last night was like this training. Every few hours I woke up and I was in school. Now, when you have these thought forms, you're going to lose it. But when you have these thought forms and you can hold neutrality, you're going to keep it, right? It was like my higher self or some headmaster was like testing me. Okay, so try this thought form. Dumped me right down into duality. Okay, so try this thought form. Oh, I'm still in the peak state. It was kind of like the whole night, just like playing around. So maybe tomorrow we're going to receive that huge bolstering to lift us into the infinite. How long we can stay there depends on how much we identify with separation consciousness. So no judgment, we'll just watch. Maybe we'll stay there for 3 minutes. Maybe we'll stay there for 20 minutes. Maybe we'll stay there for a whole hour. Some people maybe will stay in that peak state from here on. I remember Eckhart Tolle. He went into a peak state and just stayed in it. I mean, that's not fair. That doesn't happen very often, right? Eckhart Tolle was one of those, he just crossed over into the peak state and he was in it. He never fell from it. I don't think that's the norm. I think we go in, then we fall out. Then we go in, then we fall out. We get better and better at staying in. And at a certain point, everyone in the human race on planet Earth is in. And nobody can ever fall into distortion again. And that could be 10 years out for our whole human race to be in. So it's going to be interesting to watch. Whew. All right, I think I'll say goodbye because I'm home now. Hi, Holger. Nice to see you. All right, bye, guys.